This meeting is being recorded.
Great.
One mute my own.
I'll just lose that. Morning as everybody's joining. I hope everybody can hear me. I am learning a new tool that we're using for our WebExes. We're no longer using WebEx, we're using Zoom. So I've only used it a couple of times, so forgive me as I'm just trying to figure out, oh, there's my participant list, just trying to see who all is on the call and all that. So there we go. Oh, now you see my keyboard. There we go. That looks better. It's very early here in Seattle, 7 o'clock in the morning. So this is as good as I look at 7 o'clock in the morning. Now you all know. Let's see. So I'm sure there's probably going to be some other folks that will pop in and join us. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you guys all are. It's good to be able to reach out and chat with some of you that I haven't seen for either a year or more, or just since this last July when I was over there in APCJ in Mumbai or in India. So first off, I'm going to make sure, it looks like everybody, make sure that you all see the screen that I'm sharing, because that's what I'll be working on through most of this call. I wanted to, I scheduled an hour and a half for this session. That is so that we had enough time to cover everything. It does not necessarily mean that we will take an entire hour and a half. But the main focus of what I wanted to go through, since a lot of you have had the opportunity to either have me or Michael and Amia sit down with you and go through some of the materials face-to-face, one-on-one. As we release more materials, more content, it's going to be more and more increasingly unlikely that we'll always be able to come out and sit with you guys There you go. It's going to be increasingly unlikely that we can always sit with you one-on-one and have a 1-day or 2-day train the trainer. So instead, the idea is to have a session where I can introduce you to the materials that are new without necessarily going through them as though we were teaching the entire class, because of course we don't have time to do all of that. This is essentially a 3-day class. And then give you guys, and then also we can talk about some other changes, most of which I covered recently in the newsletter I sent to you. So I wanted to give you guys also the opportunity to ask questions and make any kind of comments or feedback that you have as well. So if we take 90 minutes, we'll take 90 minutes. If not, we'll take as long as we need to take. So as I said, the main reason that I wanted to get us all together was to simulate a train-the-trainer opportunity on this new class that I have been telling you guys about for the last several months, that I had on my agenda that I was working on. And it is done. It is the 3-day class that focuses on ASM and also includes some of the new advanced WAF features. The content here, first off, the idea of this class is what it sounds like. It's intended to be just a standalone training opportunity for just ASM. That does not mean, the way that I put together the modular training options. You of course can still teach this along with anything else that you want to. But the idea is, if you wanted to really kind of focus on just ASM for a day or two, or even just a half a day, you have these topics that you can pick and choose from. You will notice that a lot of these topics are also covered in the 2 other classes that we have, the 3-day partner bootcamp and then the 2-day security solutions class. So for example, on the agenda that you see here, lessons 1 and 2, those are both covered in the 2-day partner bootcamp. And one of the things I wanted to point out about that, if you guys are teaching the 2-day partner bootcamp, is I've actually considered adding a slide in that class at the end of the ASM lesson, because you touch just a little bit in that second lesson. You start talking a little bit about this concept of staging, but you don't cover staging at all in the partner bootcamp, the 3-day partner bootcamp. And I want to encourage you at that time to maybe use that as an opportunity to drum up interest for students to come and take the next class, the 2-day security solutions. Because the 2-day security solutions class, it starts with lesson 3. So it assumes the first students have already learned the content from lessons 1 and 2. But as you may recall, it does start with a review. There's a review section that's about 10 slides or so. It just reviews some of the stuff that's covered in lessons 1 and 2. Mm. So lessons on this agenda here, lessons 3 and 4 are covered in the security solutions class, and lessons 6 and 7 are covered in the security solutions class. Let me make sure I'm muting everybody here. I'm just muting some of you as you're coming in, so just bear with me here. Whoops. There we go. There we go. So on this first slide, really the only new, for those of you that have reviewed the content for the 3-day partner bootcamp and for the 2-day security solutions, the only real new subject on here is this lesson 5, attack signatures. However, on the second slide, the only thing on here that was previously covered was lesson 13. Excuse me, lesson 12. We cover the layer 7 denial of service in the 2-day security solutions class. So everything else on here, lessons 8, 9, 10, 11, and 13, 14, and 15, those are all basically new content, new stuff that you have that you can teach. And that's really, those are the things that I really wanted to introduce you to, since you already have, you've either had train the trainers on the other topics, or you've been able to hopefully watch any of the videos that I have available for you. So I don't really want to, talk about those a whole lot. I do want to point out, though, that for some of you, before I get into the newest content, for some of you, the content in lesson 6 for the brute force, that content has changed pretty dramatically. And you may have seen the newest content, you may not have seen the newest content. I just wanted to make sure that you guys are all aware that our brute force protection has really been improved. I think it's a really great improvement. And so in the previous, some of you way back a year and a half ago, some of you were teaching a 2-day advanced security class, which morphed into the security solutions class. In that 2-day advanced security class, we covered the brute force protection, but that was the older version, version 12. So if you haven't seen the new brute force protection, then lesson 6 might just be a little bit different than what you're used to. And you should definitely review it, because it is much better. It's a really improved feature. And you'll notice that we cover brute force twice. We cover it in lesson 6, and then it's covered again in lesson 13. And I'll explain that. I'll explain why kind of when we get to that point in just a few minutes. So with that being said, I wanted to use this opportunity to introduce you, as I said, to some of the new lessons without actually going through them slide by slide. My coworker Michael, many of you know Michael in EMEA. He's actually been in Seattle this week. He's on the call with us right now, and but he's in his hotel room, and I'm in my house. We'll see each other in the office in a few hours. But he and I have been recording these new lessons. So just yesterday, we recorded myself teaching lesson 5, and then the lessons on the other slide. So those videos, in addition to covering this session today, those videos will actually be available to you. I'll probably post them within a few days, maybe not by the end of this week, but soon. So you can actually go and see me teaching those if you want a little bit more prep. So let's go and just talk about some of these new slides that we've got here, and we'll start, like I said, with the attack signatures. Now, one thing I want to point out is in the 3-day partner boot camp, in lesson 2, we cover file type enforcement and attack signatures. We covered attack signatures briefly in that class. What I decided to do, there were things that I really wanted to cover with attack signatures, and there really just isn't time in that 3-day partner boot camp. So for this particular course, I took out any mention of attack signatures from lesson 2, and I just created a standalone lesson 5 on attack signatures. And the idea of this lesson is really to cover everything that there is to do about attack signatures with big IP, with ASM, excuse me. This first slide is the only one that is just a text slide. You know, most of you know I'm not a big fan of text slides, but I kind of just, I wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce the idea that the main idea of this slide here is that attack signatures work on every aspect of a request. Everything from the request line to the headers, to the data input by the user in form fields, and so on. That's really the whole point of this slide, is just attack signatures are applying negative security to the entire request. And then we go into some of the different methods that we add attack signatures. So the next few slides are really just talking about how to add additional attack signatures. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with this page that I have on the screen right now, this page was added a few releases ago, and those of you that know me know that I'm pretty direct. I tell you guys my true opinions on things. I don't think this page is very clear on its purpose. You use it to define the type of web server technology that is being used by the web application. So you would, specify that it's an IIS server using ASP and SQL Server. But it's not really clear why you're doing that. So on this slide, you go through and you explain that the purpose of this page is you're defining the server technology, but you're doing it so that ASM will add additional attack signatures specific to IIS and ASP and SQL Server and so forth. That's the whole purpose of why we come to this page. And so this is the first way that we can add new signatures to the security policy. The main way that we add new signatures is using the page that I hope you're all very familiar with now, the learning and blocking settings page. I'm through some of the different ASM trainings you guys have done. I'm sure you've all come here and you've added attack signatures. And so, we go through this page. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. And I do want to point out, just as a reminder, that I do have instructor notes throughout this, all of these new lessons, and the notes are tagged with the animation number. So this is intended to be what you would say at first, and then you click the mouse, and then you would say the second thing. And again, I don't ever expect you to say things word for word. I don't want you to be reading my speaker notes. The speaker notes are there to guide you. And you'll also notice now and then I will also, I'll throw in some questions that I ask my students when I have the opportunity. Just suggestions, certainly nothing you guys have to do. So those are the two main ways that you add attack signatures to a security policy. You use the server technologies page and then the attack signatures page. Then the next slide is just talking about how to see all the signatures that are currently in a security policy. Then we talk a little bit about staging and enforcement. And the key here is keeping in mind that at this point, if you're doing this class, at this point, I hope you have already covered lesson 4, learning, staging, and enforcement. I would always recommend, if you're going to be teaching ASM, just parts of, if you're going to be putting together a custom agenda for ASM, I'd always recommend you teach lessons 3 and 4, because they really are the whole, it's the meat of how security policies are built. And then everything else are all just security features we can add on to it. So it's very important for an ASM administrator to understand this idea of enforcement. And so on the slide we were just looking at there, this slide is talking about the fact that no matter how many signatures you have on a security policy, they are not going to block requests unless they are enforced. And then we talk about the fact that there's actually two different methods that administrators can use to go through this enforcement process. They can enforce signatures as they are being triggered, perhaps, when they see people are attempting SQL injection attacks and it's triggering these different SQL injection signatures. They can then use those violations to enforce the signatures. So they can kind of do it bit by bit. And that method is typically used to ensure, to reduce false positives, to keep the false positives low. But then you also talk about the fact that you can go right to, I think it's the next slide. Nope, it's on this slide as well. On this slide, you can also go to the learning and blocking settings page, and you can just enforce all the signatures at one time. That, of course, is the fast method, the quick way of doing it, with the side effect possibly of maybe false positives, who knows. So this slide here is really just all about making sure that everybody understands that when your signatures are not enforced, ASM does not block. That's an important concept to understand. I have heard stories of customers that their signatures never come out of staging and they continue to get attacked all the time and they don't know why. And then this slide is just talking about updating your signatures with our signature update server that we have. We have it available, you know, all around the world, different locations of where that's done. I think this slide's pretty self-explanatory, just kind of how signatures are updated. And then the other slides that I added for this section talk about signature sets and individual signatures. So this is kind of new. This might be new content for some of you as well. When you're talking about signature sets, these are all the sets that you can add to a security policy, the sets of signatures. And the important thing to understand about these is that they're filter-based signature sets. So what that means is they all, the signatures that are added to those sets are not done manually. They're done through a filter so that when new signatures are updated from our signature server, they're all tagged with things like the attack types and the accuracy. And so we go in on this slide, you do go in and you view that a little bit. I'm looking at the wrong slide, so I guess I can't do that. I was going to show it to you. So that's what we look at on that slide, is just kind of how the existing signature sets are designed. And then we also go in and drill into a specific attack signature. And you actually get to the point, I don't know how many of you have done this here, down here at the bottom here, but you can drill into any attack signature. You can, you can use filtering to find a signature, but you can drill to the point where you can click on that view link and you can actually view the documentation behind any signature that's on on ASM. And it gives you a lot of details, and those details come from our offices in Tel Aviv, where they create all these signatures. So it's actually some really interesting details about attack signatures. And then the last two things that you do is you cover creating a custom attack signature and then a custom signature set. And those are great ways that you can stop attacks that are brand new, that we don't even have new signatures for yet. All it takes to create a custom signature is some identifier of the signature threat. If we can, and keep it in mind with ASM, you can view every request in the event log. So if you can view the request and you can see the a signature that got through, you should be able to identify something about that signature that you can use to create your own custom signature. And then if you want, you can create a signature set. You can add that new signature to the signature set, and then you can add that new signature set to the security policy. As simple as that. And then in this exercise, they're going to go through the process of attacking using signature violations. They'll set up a new policy. All their signatures will be in staging. And so they'll fire off some attacks, command execution attacks, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. And then they're going to use those attacks to enforce just some specific signatures, the ones that actually got triggered. And then, of course, they'll create a custom signature and a custom signature set. So that is the new lesson 5. If you have any questions, I know some are on here. There is a way to add comments, but as I said, I am new to Zoom, so I'm trying to figure out how I can see that. But if you have questions, and you can see where
Yeah, Chris, good morning. Michael here. By the way, everyone,
Hi, Michael.
good afternoon or good evening. Chris, you don't have to worry about that. I am monitoring the chat group, so if anyone has a question, yeah, they can, of course, unmute and ask. And if they do not want to do that, I am monitoring the chat group, so don't worry.
Excellent. Okay. So if you have questions, let me know, and then Michael can kind of interject. And I certainly would like to make this as interactive as you guys would like to make it as well. All right. So I'm going to then move on because we've already, you guys should already know brute force and CSRF and geolocations and so forth. The next new lesson is all about PCI compliance and data guard. And really, it's mostly about PCI compliance. Data guard is a feature. The main reason that we have this data guard feature is for PCI compliance. I think this lesson is going to be ideal for any ASM customer that is in the financial industry or e-commerce, anyone that deals with PCI compliance. I think this is a really good introduction to it. And the first few slides, we actually just talk about PCI compliance. I'm not going to read these slides for you. A lot of this was new for me. I have understood PCI compliance for years, but I'd never dived really very deep into the specifics of PCI compliance. So you'll see there's a little bit of text there in the speaker notes about it. For those of you that are not as familiar with it, it's just designed by the credit card companies as a way to prevent credit card fraud. So PCI, what they did is they came together in 2004 and created a series of requirements, 6 requirements. So these are the 6 requirements. You can see them spelled out in the speaker notes: building a secure network, protecting cardholder data, and so forth. And then these 6 requirements, each of them have sub-requirements. So the secure network has 2 sub-requirements. Secure cardholder data has 2 requirements. Vulnerability management has 2 sub-requirements. Access control has 3. Testing and monitoring has 2, and then information security has 1. And when you get to this point on this slide, what you've really done is you've given sort of a background, an overview of PCI compliance in general. And what I mentioned in the video when I was recording this last night with Michael was that a savvy ASM user might look at this and say, ASM doesn't have anything to do with, having a network firewall configured in the network or antivirus software. And that is because not all of these apply to an ASM security policy. So there's actually this next slide. When you play the slide, a lot of them will be faded out, and only six of these different 12 subcategories are those that ASM has some effect over. And on the next slide, you look at those six with the PCI compliance report. So the next couple of things we talk about is the PCI compliance report. You could compare it to the table there, that graphic of the six subcategories. But you do see on the PCI compliance report, you do see all 12 of the subcategories, but the ones that don't apply to ASM have the NA, the not applicable. And so on this slide, the next slide, what you talk about is for each one of these subcategories, what needs to be done to make it compliant, such as making sure you're using an HTTPS virtual server, making sure that you have unique usernames for all big IP administrators, making sure all your signatures are enforced, and so forth. So as you work through this slide, your PCI compliance report will become complete, you'll be compliant, and then you show the printable version, actually, I think on the next slide here. On this next slide, you talk about the PDF that you can use to have on site. So the first half of this lesson is really focusing on just PCI compliance in general. Then we talk about the second half of the lesson kind of focuses on DataGuard. And for those of you who are not familiar with DataGuard, what DataGuard does is it takes information like you see on the screen here when credit card information is being returned in HTTP responses that is not PCI compliant. So DataGuard will fix that. This will show how to do it. It's very simple. It's a simple checkbox, very simple to configure in the big IP. So you go in, you enable DataGuard, and then you see all of your sensitive data, your credit card numbers, and for those of us in the US, our US Social Security numbers are masked. That's the second half of this lesson, is really just talking about using DataGuard in general. When you are just using its basic features, DataGuard's very, very simple to use. But there's a lot of requirements or needs out there for confidential data to be masked that is not inherently part of DataGuard. So for example, the example we use is a UK national insurance number is not masked even when you have DataGuard turned on. And that is because DataGuard by default only applies to credit card numbers and US Social Security numbers. So anything else that we want to use DataGuard for, we have to create what are called custom masks. So the rest of this lesson talks about how to create custom masks. And the main thing that you need to know to create a custom mask is how to do regular expressions. So for those of you that are familiar with regular expressions, this will actually be something that maybe you've never taught it before, but you'll have an opportunity to share with your users some of the basics. I went through a bunch of websites and I kind of pulled out some of the basic parts of regular expressions. I know there's a lot more you can do with regular expressions, far beyond what I have covered in here. So these are the things that I have covered. How to do literal text, like any letters A through Z, which are case sensitive, any numbers, how to identify any letter, like bracket A through Z matches any letter, or bracket 0 through 9 matches any number. And then you can also, inside of brackets, you can just put a series of characters, like I've got A, E, I, O, U, and that would match any one of the numbers inside of those brackets. And then the last bullet talks about a lot of characters like hyphens, @ symbols. They're treated as literal characters in a mask. So when you're going through this slide, the idea is you're sort of teaching regular expressions. So, for example, what I was showing yesterday in the video is if you have this as a custom mask, A, M, and then A through Z in brackets, that's going to mask these first three values because they all start with AM, and they all end with any one letter. But this one doesn't start with AM. This one doesn't end with any one letter. And this one ends in a letter, but it's not an uppercase letter. So the idea of going through this slide is really just kind of talking about what we're trying to do is we're building towards how to build the custom mask needed for that UK insurance number. So the next slide, we go a little farther, and we talk about using the period to match any character, any number, any letter, any special character. So for example, this first character is any letter B through D, which of course would just be B, C, and D, followed by any character whatsoever, followed by another letter of B through D. So it says it'll match this, it'll match that, it'll match that. It'll even match this because the dollar symbol is any character. But it doesn't match that because there's two characters there and the period only matches one character and so on. And then the last one that's important is the curly quotes. That's probably the most important one. And the curly quotes is used to represent multiple versions of a regular expression. So for example, 0 through 9 listed 4 times, that would represent a 4-digit number, any 4-digit number. But you can also represent that with 0 through 9 and then the 4 in a curly brace. That means 4 of these. So now I give another example here, and again, we're getting closer to being able to identify how to mask out that UK insurance number. And that's what the next slide is like. Okay, so now how do we build this custom mask for this, which is BN, or not BN, any 2 letters, followed by any 6 numbers, followed by any letter. And you slowly build it this way. You say, well, we could do this, any 2 letters, or we could do this, any letter twice. Then we could do this, any 6 numbers, or we could make it cleaner, any number 6 times, followed by any letter. And that's what your final mask would look like down at the bottom. The second version is another way that this UK insurance number is entered by users. They will put spaces in between, and that would need a separate custom mask, which could look like this down here. Any letter twice, followed by a space. There's a space there. And then any letter twice, followed by a space. Another letter twice, followed by a space, and so on. And once you know these masks, then you go back to the configuration utility, and then you're going to add those custom masks into the data guard screen. And when we're done, we should get our UK numbers masked here. You can see it masked. This last slide here that you're seeing here, those are 3 examples that are not being masked and each one of them is not masked for a reason. And so here's an opportunity for a little audience interaction. You know, I asked them, what are the reasons why these 3 aren't masked? The first one has 7 numbers, not 6. The second one is using hyphens, and the third one is using lowercase numbers, not, lowercase letters, not uppercase letters. So that is your PCI compliance and data guard. They actually do a couple of things here. They will go in and they will view their PCI compliance report with the new security policy, which will be pretty much completely non-compliant. Then they will add all the elements that they need to achieve PCI compliance, including enabling data guard, and then they will create a couple of custom masks for some custom codes. So that is data guard and PCI compliance. Lesson 9, the way that I was introducing this in the video that I recorded yesterday is pretty much everything in all of the lessons in this 3-day class. They all really focus on adding security, how to add security, different kinds of security for different kinds of threats. Lesson 9 is kind of a different topic. Lesson 9 is all about making policy management easier, specifically when you are managing multiple policies. And the feature is called parent and child security policies. The idea here on this first slide is we talk about that in normal security policy management, you manage multiple security policies for multiple applications. You know, this could be in the 10s, this could be in the 50s, who knows? And each security policy is unique. That the little colored bar here is an indicator. It's just a graphic I created to represent, you know, varying security levels. Some security policies have a lot of security enabled, and some security policies have just a little bit of security enabled. But the challenge here is that as you're building security policies, you have to go through this process of kind of doing the same thing over and over again. For example, you're always adding file type enforcement. You're always adding attack signatures, and maybe you're always adding geolocation enforcement, and so on. There's these different settings that for every security policy you create, you have to go through this process, and that can be time consuming. And then the second challenge that's outlined on this slide says, for example, here says, I'm adding a new custom signature to this blue security policy. Well, when I add that new custom signature, that doesn't affect all the rest of the security policies. I would have to go add that custom signature to all of them as well. Or maybe I'm adding a new hot zone location that I want to block, and I'm only adding that to policy, the yellow policy. All of my other security policies are still vulnerable. So the challenges are that when you create new policies, it takes a lot of work to get all the pieces together that you want to include. And when you want to include new things in your policy, to do it across all of them, again, takes a lot of work. That is what we solve by using parent and child security policies. So if this is new to you, it's a great feature. It's a really easy feature to use. It's actually really fun to use. The idea here is we first, in this slide, the first thing you do is you set up the parent policy. You build this the parent security policy. And then you define, there are about, I want to say about 12 different categories of security that you can define as mandatory or optional. And then there's a third option, which is none, where you're not going to apply those. But what you're doing is you're saying that of these categories, those are going to be mandatory for every child policy that uses this parent. Or they might be optional settings for child security policies. So if I say that I'm going to require file type enforcement for all child security policies, then I can assign that at the parent level. And I can also add all the attack signatures, including custom signatures. I can add that at the parent level as well. And I can define a list of geolocations that I want to block from all child security policies. So those would all be mandatory settings. And then what will happen on this slide is, as each one of these child policies is created, what you see are all these mandatory settings just immediately apply to each child policy. So it makes creating those child policies much faster. And then these optional settings, you can, if you want, you can apply them. So for example, the blue policy took both optional settings. The yellow policy just took the data guard settings. This policy just took the server technology settings. And this policy chose to take neither of those optional settings. So the two benefits of doing this is it does make creation of child policies much faster, but probably the bigger benefit is it enables organizations to control the minimum amount of security that they want every security policy to have. So everything they define in the mandatory, that would be their minimal security requirements for every child security policy, because they will all be required to take those settings. So that's really the big benefit here. And this just gives an example of updating what's really nice. So on this, for example, in the graphic, you add a new geolocation, Syria, and then that new geolocation automatically gets added to every child security policy. You add a new custom signature, that custom signature gets added to every child security policy. So again, makes it a lot easier to manage things from a top level down. But then this last slide does also add that last bit that says I can still apply some individual settings here and here. You can still apply additional individual settings which will still enable all of the child security policies to have a varying degree of security. But you'll notice that none of them have less than this, because this was the minimal amount of security required by the organization. But some actually even have more security. And then we go through the UI of how to do it. You first go in to create the parent security policy, as you normally would. And then you talk about this tab, the inheritance tab. This is the tab where you will now go in and define all the categories of security that are either going to be mandatory for all child policies, or optional for all child policies, or none, which means no child policies will take any settings whatsoever from the parent. Then you're going to create a child security policy. And the only real difference on here, and you really can't see it on this slide, I apologize. The only real difference here is we now have the parent as a pop-up, as an option here. And so when you select the parent, then what's going to happen is the rest of creating the policy is going to be easier, because a lot of the items on this page where you're creating your policy, a lot of the items are going to be grayed out because they have been mandatorily set at the parent level. and you can't set them at the child level. So you'll go through and you'll see that in the child policy creation. And then you will look at the inheritance settings for a child policy. And on this page, sorry, I know there's a lot of red rectangles here, but you can see that some of these categories are inherited and they're locked, which means they were mandatory at the parent level. So for the child policy, there's nothing they can do. They are going to take whatever mandatory file type enforcement settings were set by the parent. However, there are 3 optional settings. And so for the child, they can choose whether they want to accept or decline the settings. And then this slide just takes you through some of the different security policy pages, like the learning and blocking settings page, or the geolocation enforcement, or the policy properties page. And the idea here is that you can see that when you're looking at a child policy, this is my child policy here, when you're looking at that, a lot of items are grayed out because they can't be modified, because they were mandatorily set at the parent level. But in some cases, for example here, although I cannot remove the 2 geolocations that were set at the parent level, sometimes you can still add additional items. We can still add additional geolocations to a child policy. So that is our parent and child security policies. And on this slide, I actually had an error, a mistake on this slide. I need to fix this. But on this slide, what they're going to do is they're going to create their parent policy. Then they're going to set their inheritance settings. They're going to also define some aspects of the parent. For example, they're going to go under the learning and blocking settings page, and they're going to define some violations, some blocking settings. They're going to define file type enforcement. They're going to define data guard. They're going to define geolocation enforcement. They're going to set all of that up at the parent level. And then they're going to create a child security policy, and they're going to see which things they can modify on the child policy and which things they cannot modify because they were set at the parent as a mandatory setting. And then this exercise has an if time permits, they can create a second child security policy. So that is the lesson 9. And as a reminder, just a quick reminder that I will, within a few days, I'll have videos of me actually going through each of these slides one at a time, as I'm teaching them. So you can get a little bit more information than I'm giving you here. So lesson 10, to do a time check. Okay. Lesson 10, login enforcement and violation detection. This is a couple of interesting features here that I decided to throw in because I don't think a lot of people know about them, know that they're available. In the brute force protection lesson that we cover creating a logon page, which looks like this. We already have covered creating a logon page. And the only way that you can track brute force, or excuse me, let me rephrase that. The only way that you can utilize brute force protection is to create a login page, because ASM needs to know when a user has had a successful login and when they had a failed login, and that's how it can identify brute force protection. This takes the idea of login pages to the next level. It gives us one additional use of a login page with login enforcement. And the idea here is if we have pages that users must access only after having logged in. So the example on here, I have some URLs across the bottom. For example, if you go to Amazon you should be able to view all of the products that are available without logging in. You should be able to view, some of the Amazon policies without logging in, but you shouldn't be able to view your order history or your personal profile without having gone through the login page successfully. And that's the idea of login page enforcement. So this slide is showing how the good user here, they're going to first go through the login page, and then once they've done that, they'll get this cookie, this kind of a session cookie. And that session cookie is what enables the web application to then let them see their order history and their personal profile without having to re-log on each time. And that session stays good as long as you have your browser open. But then we have this bad user over here, and he's going to try to access one of the pages that require a log on, but he's going to try to access it without actually logging on first, and he's going to be successful, which is why there's no name attached here. It just says, hello, so-and-so, because maybe he successfully got to that page without logging on first. And that is the threat that we're solving with login page enforcement. With login page enforcement, it ensures, on this graphic, what happens is the login page moves kind of right here. And what the graphic is implying is ASM is now going to ensure that for certain pages, we can identify the URLs that users must have authenticated to the login page first. And so now when this user tries to go to the balance.php page, ASM can identify that this user had not gone to the login page first, and that's why they get the big block there. This page here is kind of a review from the brute force protection. We cover this. It's just all the elements you need to create a login page item in ASM, because a login page item is needed in order to do login page enforcement in a security policy. So then we review, here's how to create the login page with the URL, the parameter names, and then data that will appear on a successful login versus data that will appear to the user if they fail to log in. The only thing that is specific to login enforcement is this page. On this page here, this is where you will specify all of the different URLs that must have, that the user must have authenticated first. They had to have gone through a logon page before they can see the orders.php page. You'll see here I'm using a wildcard. So customer/wildcard, that will apply to any of these pages here. And that is how you set up login enforcement. It's actually very easy to set up login enforcement. So that's the first half of that lesson. The second half of this lesson is violation detection. So what's important to really kind of focus on this is violation detection is not a new form of violation like signature violations and so forth. What we're doing here with violation detection is we're identifying a user or a device that has had multiple violations within a period of time. Let's say this one user has just submitting cross-site script request after cross-site script request, and they're just continuing to do that. The idea of this feature here is we could continue to block them, that's fine. But the idea here is we can identify them now as essentially a bad actor. We can say that user has reached a threshold of violations. I don't care what violation types, signature violations, forceful browsing violations, command execution, you know, CSRF attack you see on there, doesn't matter which violation type, they have reached a threshold of so many violations in a period of time that we can now choose to just block that completely for a period of time, good, bad, or otherwise. So what we're looking at here is, first off, there are 4 ways that we can identify where a violation is coming from. We can do it based on the username. That, of course, is only possible if we're using a logon page. So if we're using a logon page, then we can identify these requests that are coming from a specific user. Or we can do it based on their session ID, or their device ID, or their IP address. And for each one of these, I know this screenshot, you really can't see it, but for each one of these, I'm just going to move this out of the way here, we set a threshold of violations. So we can say, if they have hit 20 violations by their username, or 20 violations by their session ID, then at that point, I can now perform some sort of an action. And the action could be just block that username, or block that session, or block that IP address completely for 10 minutes. And you'll notice here, they're requesting a couple of valid pages without violations, and those are now going to be blocked, because when you're using violation detection, once we've identified a bad actor by one of these 4 thresholds, and we choose to block all, that literally means block that user entirely for the duration that we have specified. That's the difference with violation detection. Like I said, we could continue to block the SQL injection attacks. We're now just choosing to block them completely. To set this up, you can, using this page here, our session tracking page. I'm just going to go ahead and mute there. On this page, there's a few things that you're going to do. If you're unfamiliar with this page, we use this page in the next 2 lessons, this lesson and the next lesson. This first field here, this is how ASM enables the concept of device IDs. We can use device IDs in a few of our different features. And just for your guys' information, the idea of creating the device ID, this is something kind of unique to ASM. When you include this checkbox here, what that does is it enables ASM to create device IDs for all incoming devices. And the device ID is just a unique generated ID that takes into account the user's computer. And to be honest, I'm not even sure of all the things it uses to take into account. Probably their browser, their computer, but it creates this unique ID. And we can use the device ID feature for a few different features within ASM. This is just one of the features we can use it for. So this is how you enable device ID creation, so to speak. The second feature, session awareness, this is what enables us to track users by their username by using one of our logon pages. So this here is the login page that we just created in a previous slide, a couple slides ago. So we can also use logon pages. And then down here at the bottom, this is where we can now enable this feature that we're talking about. This is the real main part of the feature, which is violation detection. So by selecting this checkbox here, this is saying, I want to now track the number of violation detections based on their username or their IP address or their device ID, and I want to perform some sort of an action if they meet a threshold. This number here that you see, this timeout, or I'm sorry, not the timeout, excuse me, this number here, that is the amount of time that the user has to reach that threshold. So if we set the threshold as 30 violations, what this says is if they reach 30 violations within this time frame, we are now going to perform the action against that user. So on this page here, let me go back one. Come on. There we go. This is sort of the real meat of what this page is all about. You'll see that we have, for all those 4 different ways we can identify somebody, by username, by session ID, device ID, or IP address, each one of these we can enable and then set the threshold. And so, again, you can set different thresholds for each one of those 4 values, with the idea again being that if a specific username has 20 violations within that time frame we had, within 900 seconds, we are now going to do this. We're now going to either indefinitely block them or block them for a period of time. And we're going to fully block them, not just from bad requests, but from all requests. So that's sort of how that whole feature comes together. There's some other specifics on this slide. I'll let you watch the video so you can get a little bit more information about this tab here, log all requests, and this tab here. But that's the real idea of this feature, is we're setting thresholds of violations with the intention that we're just going to block out something completely for a period of time. And then we have this really great report, this session tracking report. This is designed to show you everybody that is being blocked right now based on their username, based on their device ID, their IP address, and so forth. And you can actually see how long they're being blocked, up until what time. And an administrator can actually select one of these and click on the release button. They can release them so that they can gain access again. And that's the whole idea of violation detection. So what I like to say is it takes our detection, our violation, and our blocking to the next level. I can already block out bad requests, but this is now letting me say, if you have had so many bad requests in such a period of time, I'm just blocking you altogether. That's kind of the next level that we're taking that with that feature. All right, in lesson 7, cookie hijacking protection. This is kind of a cool feature here. It's actually a very short lesson because it's actually fairly simple to set up. The idea here, if you're familiar with how session cookies work, we talked about a little bit earlier when we were looking at login page enforcement. When I log into a site like Amazon, as soon as I log in with my username and my password, I get a session cookie. And that session cookie is what enables me to now do all these things on the Amazon website. I can look at my orders and I can, place an order, and I don't have to re-authenticate over and over again because all of my session information, my login information is stored in that cookie. But the idea is, well, what happens if this user, this malicious user, is able to steal my cookie, which they have tools that enable them to do that. And if they do that, then they can access Amazon, and Amazon will think that they are logged in as me, as my user account. So they can see all of my orders, they can see my profiles, they could change my address, and start ordering things to the new address, which could be their address, and so forth. So that is how session hijacking takes place, or cookie hijacking. It's referred to in both of those ways, cookie hijacking or session hijacking. So the way that ASM protects this is ASM now adds its own protection cookie, essentially. So once we have cookie hijacking protection enabled, there's a second cookie that is added. And we can also even use the device ID feature here. And this slide actually talks a little bit about how the device ID is generated. That's what these little magnifying glasses are for. The idea is, as soon as we connect and we're going to get this cookie, ASM sort of scans our device and it creates this device ID for us. And that device ID can become as part of the cookie protection. But the main gist of this here is now, if a malicious user steals our session cookie, that session cookie has been protected by ASM, and ASM will recognize that when this user tries to access the site with my session cookie, it doesn't also have the corresponding protection cookies that are needed, and ASM will recognize that, and as a result, it will block the requests. So it's actually a fairly simple feature to set up. And in fact, there's only one more slide to this lesson on how to set it up. What's really great about this feature is if users are using the comprehensive policy builder, the comprehensive policy builder enables this automatically. They don't even have to enable this. This is enabled by default, and they will just get cookie hijacking protection already ready to go. But this is pretty much it. This session has 3 slides, 1, 2, 3. So it's a pretty quick, easy lesson to get through to talk about cookie hijacking protection. And then they can play with it. They go in and they use a couple of different web browsers. The key here in this exercise is they can see how they can steal a session cookie value from one browser session into another browser session, and they can take on the identity of that user session in this new browser. That's without the protection. And then, of course, they will add the protection, try the same thing again, and then they'll get blocked. So that is that new feature for you guys. It's not a new feature with ASM. It's actually been around for quite a while, but it's a new feature for you guys to teach on. So the last 3 lessons, 13, 14, and 15, these are 3 of the new features that really are kind of tied together with advanced WAF. So lesson 12, like I said, if you have been teaching the 2-day security class, or if you reviewed the 2-day security class, then you've already seen all of those slides. They have not changed at all for this course. So lesson 13, I personally recommend that if you're going to teach lesson 13, I think you should also teach the lesson before that that covers brute force protection and web scraping. And you don't even have to cover the web scraping if you don't want. You could, cut out those slides. But I don't think you should go into distributed brute force protection without having first covered standard brute force protection. But I do have a couple of slides that review. So this slide here is really just a review of source-based brute force attacks and protection. And this is all covered in lesson 5, I believe it is, lesson 5, or lessons 4 or 5, that covers brute force. But this is the new feature, for those of you that are not familiar with source-based. We can now do source-based brute force protection based on device ID. So there's another feature that uses the device ID, or based on their source IP address, or specifically if they're just targeting one username. So the example I use is if you know somebody's work email and you're pretty sure that that work email is what they use to log on to their corporate system, then you already know their username. Then you can just use a huge password list and you can just do a brute force attack trying to log on with their username with thousands and thousands of passwords. So this protection will prevent that with something like a CAPTCHA challenge. So it'll, after so many failed attempts, we'll do a CAPTCHA challenge. But all of that is covered in the first brute force lesson. So that's really why I recommend you cover that first if you're going to teach this. Because the threat here that's new is, what if the attack, the brute force attack, is coming from thousands of different devices and IP addresses, trying thousands of different usernames? Those attacks are not going to be protected, or excuse me, those are not going to be able to be blocked by our standard brute force protection. That is what we have the distributed brute force protection set up for. So with distributed brute force protection, ASM is now looking at how many failed login attacks are occurring over a period of time. And these could be from a distributed brute force attack, but these could also be from you. Because, oops, you know, maybe I just had a failed login. We all have sometimes where we log in with our wrong username and password. Those could also be seen as part of an attack. It's possible. So we have a threshold time frame. There's a period of time, and if so many failed attacks, if so many failed logins occur in a threshold, then ASM will go into distributed brute force attack mitigation. But the mitigation is typically just going to be either CAPTCHA or client-side integrity. We would never want to block in a distributed brute force attack, because once we're in a distributed brute force attack, the important thing to note is that we will stay under brute force protection for a period of time, which I believe is 60 minutes by default. So once ASM has identified that it's under a distributed brute force attack, it will perform the mitigation for 60 minutes. So if our mitigation was to block, that would mean that for all of you innocent users that try to log into your Amazon and you put in the wrong username and password, you're just going to get blocked. And not only would you get blocked, but you would be seen as one of the sources of this distributed attack, and you would just be completely blocked for 60 minutes. So we don't want that. That would be nothing but false positives. So what we just do is an alarm in CAPTCHA or an alarm in client-side integrity, so that we can still identify valid users. So if during a distributed brute force attack, you as an innocent user put in the wrong username and password, you'll now be presented with a CAPTCHA challenge. You'll fill in your CAPTCHA challenge, and then you'll put in the right password, and then you'll be fine. Then you'll get your web page. Or you'll get a client-side JavaScript challenge to make sure that you're using a valid browser. You're not using some sort of there's several brute force attack tools. So this feature works very well, and it kind of puts us a step above with brute force attack protection, because we can now identify these coming from all these different sources. So this just sort of gives an idea of how this works. This is saying that, you know, after just 4 minutes, boom, 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 all these distributed brute force attacks are coming. We have finally, within 15 minutes, that's our detection period. Within 4 minutes, we hit the threshold of 100 failed login attempts. And at that point, we are now going to be under an alarm and captcha mitigation for 60 minutes. And so now all users, when they try to hit us, whether they're good or bad, all users are going to be presented with a captcha challenge. And in this day and age, I think a lot of us are used to getting captcha challenges on websites. It's kind of the way that website security is working now. But only the users that successfully enter their captcha challenge are then going to be getting access to the web server. So that's going to cover how that protection works. There's a great log file that goes along with this. I'm not going to go through the log file in detail. You can watch the video for that. But it's a new feature with ASM, and it's just designed to show you all aspects of these distributed attacks and so forth. And then this slide is really just asking some questions. It's a way to sort of interact with your audience, because the truth of the matter is, many of us, we use the same user credentials across multiple web applications. My online banking, my Amazon, my stock trading site, and so there's some statistics here. 55% computer users will admit that they use the same credentials for all sites. And for a lot of users, for many users, they have almost 100 different online accounts. And that leads us into credential stuffing. So the idea of credential stuffing, and this is a very new feature for us, it's very cool. With credential stuffing, the idea here is there are leaked known username password combinations that occur. So for example, this could be any site, this could be target.com, their username and password list becomes leaked. Now we can take those leaked credentials and put them into a leaked credential database. So we now have a leaked, but before I get to that, the idea here is this malicious user now can take this leaked credentials list and they can now start flooding all these different web applications trying these same credentials, again, knowing that 55% of users use the same credentials across multiple sites. And then they can get a nice quick report that shows all the different user accounts that worked for the social networking sites and the e-commerce sites and the online banking sites and so forth. So that's the threat here. And then this is what they end up with. This is their report. For this online banking, all of these user accounts work. And for this e-commerce site, all of these ones work. And that, of course, gives them a lot of very valuable information that is dangerous to let out there. And this slide says, why is this so dangerous? Why? Well, what happens when this company here, their credentials get leaked? They're going to reach out to all their users. They're going to say, hey, our credentials have been leaked. You should change your password. So this user says, great, I'm going to go change my password on this website. Well, how many times does that user also change their password on all of the other sites they use? That's not as frequent. So even though this web application here is now protected from these leaked credentials, the malicious user, they can still gain access to all their other systems because the user probably didn't change their passwords across all of their systems. So that's why credential stuffing is so dangerous. For us at F5, we have this new feature, credential stuffing. It uses, from what I understand, it's going to use it uses a subscription database so that we have this database of known leaked passwords. It's called a leaked credentials dictionary. And it's the same idea. If we have 100 logins from accounts that are in this leaked credentials dictionary, we will then perform the mitigation, alarming CAPTCHA. So these two are fairly similar, but this is just failed logins in general across many sources. These are login attempts, successful or not, but they're coming from this leaked credential dictionary that users get when they license this feature, credential stuffing. So that's how that works. And then we also have another great report that shows credential stuffing and which known leaked credentials were attempted. So that is that new feature, distributed brute force. And so I'll have a chance to play with that, with doing a distributed, we'll use an I rule on this virtual server so we can simulate our requests coming from all over the world, so we can turn a source-based brute force attack into a distributed brute force attack, and our source-based protection no longer works. We'll then turn it into distributed brute force protection, and we'll see that working. We're getting low on time, so I'm going to just kind of get through these last two here. For those of you, any of you that have had the chance to teach our DHD content that was in the 2-day advanced security class, you'll be familiar with this feature here. Behavioral DOS protection. It's another new feature that comes with ASM and advanced WAF. And I'll just kind of go through the concepts here. This is all about signature-based security. So ASM is a signature-based product. We do negative security checking using signatures, like antivirus software. The challenge, the problem with signature-based security is it's only as good as the signatures that we have, the known signatures that we have. So the way that this feature works is it utilizes a couple of concepts. It utilizes requests that appear suspicious and that our servers are getting under stress. Our servers are getting overutilized. So in other words, if something is coming in that looks suspicious and our servers appear to be getting overutilized, that is what utilizes, or that, I should say, that's what triggers this feature. So what this slide shows is new requests that are coming in that ASM doesn't know about as being malicious, but once it does, once ASM or AWAF recognizes that this is suspicious, it's going to apply behavioral denial of service protection, and it'll begin to block them, or could even potentially send them to Silverline. That's another feature. The quick explanation of how this works is advanced WAF uses the concept of a baseline. A baseline is just normal traffic that comes in and builds this baseline of what is expected under normal circumstances. This little icon here is representing an algorithm. It uses a fancy algorithm that our developers have. And the baseline just continues to evolve as our web application evolves, as users use it. So the idea here is advanced WAF knows what is normal traffic. And then what happens is requests come in all day long, and requests are going to be examined against the baseline. And as long as they look fine, they're nothing different than this baseline that is established, nothing changes. But then what happens is possibly a request comes in and it looks different from the baseline, meaning it looks malicious. Something is odd about it, something's different. And the question that you ask there is, oh, well, what do you suppose happens? And at that point, what happens is ASM just sends it down to the servers. ASM doesn't block it at that point. It has no reason to block it. It just sends it down to the servers. But if it continues to do that, and it actually is an attack, then what's going to happen is the servers are going to become overutilized. And at some point, what happens is the web servers are so under stress that an attack comes through, it doesn't match the baseline, and the servers are now at a certain point of utilization. That is when Advanced WAF says, okay, we are now under attack, and it creates a dynamic signature. It creates an attack signature dynamically to recognize that new attack. And at that point now, all new traffic that comes in, attack traffic that matches that signature, is immediately blocked. So that is the concept of using behavioral denial of service protection. It's configured on the Layer 7 DOS pages. So I'm not going to go through these slides because of time. I'll let you watch the video. But it's just one of the Layer 7 denial of service features, part of our Layer 7 DOS security. Once you have this set up, you can actually go view any dynamic signatures, and you can manage your dynamic signatures. They look kind of like this. You can update the properties of dynamic signatures if you want. And then, I guess I don't have any slides. I thought I did. You can actually view reporting on it. I think they do the reporting in their lab. So what they're going to do in this exercise is they're going to start a baseline. They're going to use a baseline generator tool. They're going to just start flooding the server with valid traffic going to all the different valid pages. And once the baseline is created, then they're going to submit some malicious requests, and then they should see the dynamic signature automatically get created. And then all future requests of that same signature type should now be getting blocked as a result. So again, if you did this in the DHD, it's a very similar feature. It's just now part of ASM as a part of, was before, it was a part of DHD. So because of time, I'm only just going to mention that for those of you that have had the opportunity to go through any of the WebSafe content, and in the WebSafe content, we covered one of my favorite features, application layer encryption. Our final feature that we cover here, data safe. Data safe is nothing more than application layer encryption added into ASM. Almost all the slides are going to look very familiar to you. They are, I pretty much did kind of some copying of slides right out of the WebSafe slides, because it's really no different. The only difference is how you configure it in the configuration utility. You use the data protection in the configuration utility instead of fraud protection, I think it's called. And other than that, it's really the same feature. We just now have it bundled along with Advanced WAF because it is such a valuable feature. And a lot of organizations that could benefit from this, that don't want to purchase WebSafe, they now have the opportunity to get this feature. And it really does add a lot of great security to the web application. So that is the content of the new 3-day advanced security class. We are at 90 minutes, which is sort of the time frame that I had allocated. I will just sort of maybe do just a quick summary here. I will have videos for all of these new lessons. I'll have videos posted within the next week, and I'll send out a notification for you all so that you can all go and watch them. Again, of course, you have the speaker notes, and you can use those. I also highly recommend that you go through all the hands-on exercises. It uses this new blueprint here, the PBC ASM AWAF blueprint. And this new blueprint actually is going to, you can use the same blueprint for the security solutions class, the ASM portion of the security solutions class. I wrote that up in that last newsletter. You may notice that I have multiple versions of this ASM AWAF, and that's because I'm adding all of my ASM demos to this blueprint, and so I'm adding new things to the blueprint every day. So if you want to go through and play with the exercises, just always use the most current version of this blueprint. Once I have a finalized version of it, then we'll have our final version. So between the videos that I have posted and the exercises, you should be able to get yourself prepped to teach some of this new content. I will remind you that you can create a custom agenda. So you can do a 2-day version, and you can pick from all of these 14 topics that are in here. You can pick just the ones that you would like to cover or that you think your audience would like to watch. The one thing that I've mentioned in my newsletter, and I also mentioned it when I was teaching the folks in India and in Bangkok recently, is I really caution you against just going in and teaching the 3 AWAF, unless you're teaching it to people that have been using ASM for a long time. They already know all the ASM features, and so this will just be additional great new information for them. But if you're going out to some folks that are fairly new to ASM, these 3 lessons aren't going to really they're not going to be very valuable for them just by themselves. I would definitely encourage you to probably teach lessons 1, 2, 3, and 4 first, and then maybe, a couple of others, and then end with some of the advanced WAF. That's my personal recommendation. So with that being said, I would be more than happy, even though I didn't leave you a lot of time for it, be more than happy to take any questions. If you guys have any questions for me, any comments. I definitely hope you guys all have the time. Oh, it sounds like somebody's popping off.
Yeah, hey Chris, it's Mickey Woods from Ingram. I just wanted to say, once again, great job. I have used this content to train, specifically last quarter, as you and I had discussed, and it just works. The flow is great, and I absolutely agree with the mindset of coaching up my audience on some ASM products first, and then discussing some of the cool advanced WAF features. So that's been working really well. Nice job.
Thank you very much. It was kind of hard to catch everything, but I think what I caught was that you agree with the idea of not prepping them a little bit with ASM first before you do advanced WAF and so forth. And I thank you for the other comments. As I've said in my newsletter, as I said to you guys one-on-one, those of you that I've met with and had the chance to meet and talk with, this is a big part of my focus right now at F5. I have other content that I'll be working on. I'm here to really create content that you guys feel you can deliver that will benefit you and benefit your partners. And so you're always welcome to reach out to me. Doesn't mean I'm always going to have time to build the content that you're looking for, but please always reach out to me. So if there's no other questions or anything like that, again, get yourself familiar with this. If nothing else, this is going to help make you much more savvy on ASM. I hope it also excites you a lot more about ASM and gets you to want to go out and teach it. Stay tuned for more training to come. It will be coming soon. So I appreciate you guys all giving me an hour and 38 minutes of your time. And I hope you all have great evenings, great mornings, whatever time it is for you. And we'll talk again sometime soon. We'll probably have another WebEx sometime in the December time frame to cover any other new stuff. All right. So goodbye, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the call.
Goodbye.
Thank you, thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Christopher.
You're welcome. There we go.